And good morning. Thank you for staying with us on Citizen Extra. I am Amki Gupta. We are still tracking the big news stories for you today. One of the stories, as we mentioned earlier, that we're waiting on is Peter Kenneth, who is set to announce that he will face off with incumbent Evans Kidero and Mike Sonko for the governor's seat. We'll be talking about Nairobi politics very shortly. The Cabinet Secretary for Education, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, is expected to be meeting administrators of education and training institutions of the smooth running of teaching, learning activities during the campaign period ahead of the August polls. And finally, we're expecting NASA leader Raila Odinga to be meeting with Nairobi aspirants in strategy ahead of the general election. We'll be following that up for you very shortly, as well as taking you to Mombasa, where a conference of the National Assembly is underway. Our reporter Stephen Leto is there, and we'll be catching up with him shortly. In the first hour, we talked about the maize issue in the country and Unga politics, and now we're shifting gears ever so slightly to the larger concern of food security and does this country need a food revolution. My guest in studio, Adenor, is the chair of Parliament's Agriculture Committee. We have Dr. Sam Kamau, who is our political expert, and David Amayo, who is an agricultural expert. And I want to thank you all for staying with us this hour. I want to begin with you, Dr. Sam, to the extent that, in the last hour we tried to wrap our heads around the question of food security as a proper security issue, and to what extent that would change or inform government's approach to this. We see they want to build the mega dams. They have, of course, the two flagging irrigation projects, but nonetheless they're hoping that after they get the dams in place that these will begin to thrive. But I'm not suggesting that we should be having, GSU looking over a farmer's shoulder and saying this is a security issue, so we're going to be paying that more attention. But if policymakers really understood how critical this is to our country's stability, is there anything that you believe this administration would change in terms of its approach, even though it's a devolved function?
Thank you. I think the purpose of the strategic grain reserve is to look at the quantities that are available locally and the ones that will be produced, and to project and see whether in a couple of years we are likely to have any shortage. Now, the work, of course, is to buy food from farmers and make sure that when there is some level of kind of shortage, they're able to release this. Now, there has been a failure in the sense that what is the capacity of the strategic grain reserve? I've been told 3 million, which definitely is a something that has been used over the years, and yet we are saying that you need up to around 5 million bags. But what happened is, even if they knew and foresaw, and there was prediction that there would be a prolonged drought, we have just been told that the bags that were in storage are almost getting depleted. The other thing which has been worrying, it has happened, I think, in the last 2 years, is we are told some of the maize that was stored is unfit for human consumption. Yes. And that is why I'm saying, in terms of decision making, there are certain people who must be held responsible for the current crisis that we are experiencing. But to move the discussion to your question, I think the government foresaw, they knew that there was need. We cannot always rely on rain-fed agriculture to meet our food demands. And that is why they decided to put 1 million acres under irrigation to make sure that we will be able to produce enough and even surplus. But what we saw is that those the 1 million acres, of course, were not put under irrigation, and the two projects that were initiated did not yield as expected. Of course, there are several questions around that. But the bigger issue is, what is the role of the national government and the county governments? If you look at a county like Murang'a, the governor decided to give seeds to the people and fertilizer to help them, of course, plant. There could be a political side to it because it was in the run-up to the nominations. But the fact remains that the county governments have a definite role. But what we have seen is that farmers from days of old, they have been planting the same thing in their small or diminishing pieces of land, which are, of course, continually being subdivided. I think it's about time for the government at the national level, but also at the county government level, certain policies that, of course, prevent further subdivision of the land, but also support the farmers so that they would know what to do with their 1 acre piece of land. Is it to plant maize every season, maize and beans, even if the yield keeps diminishing? Or do we think how perhaps we could plant high value crops that would help the farmers make some little money, and therefore they could afford to buy some food? Or should we always rely on rain-fed agriculture? There's a story that ran on Citizen not long ago, I think about Yatta and East Pokot, where Yatta, which is a dry place, I think there is a certain CBO that went there and they decided to teach farmers on what they can do in terms of water harvesting. They no longer rely on rain-fed agriculture, but they harvest water when there are floods, and the water is enough, is trapped in certain small pans, water pans, that they're able to trap that and use that for an entire year, which then on that basis they're able to plant whatever crops they want, and it supports them throughout the year, and they are also able to make surplus and sell. And I think these are some of the issues we need to see the agriculture ministry, and even at the county level, more support for the farmers, the agriculture extension officers available to teach and guide the farmers on what they are supposed to do, so that we don't just rely on the government, although the government must do its part, but even the farmers must produce from their farms, and they need to be supported in that sense.
Aden, let me come to you, because you can't talk agriculture without talking land, and we've heard from some, the state of land. It's constantly, being subdivided, etc. And I'm not sure that there's any farmer who will willingly, give up his land to this sort of like amalgamation of parcels of land for better yields. What is the perspective of the committee when it comes to dealing with the land size issue in terms of food production?
Thank you, Anna. I think the issue of land is in a different docket. I don't deal with it. It is under the Ministry of Land, and my committee does not deal with it. There's a committee which deals with land issues and land policies. But
which is why I said you can't discuss one without the other.
Yeah, just coming back to the real issue of the policies. This country has a very good policies in terms of agriculture, and it is constantly being reviewed from time to time. But the question is how to implement it. The other baggage that has come into being, and is an elephant in the room, is the issue called devolution, which the government or the constitution devolved the entire agriculture production to the counties. That is where let's begin from the farm issue, the production issue. It is the sole responsibility of the counties to produce food in this country. And in terms of producing food, where does it begin? There are extension officers available in those farms to teach farmers and tell farmers and guide farmers on what to do. They are not there. They are not even there. The few who are there have either retired or they have grown old. The same thing with the farmers. Those people who are in the farm, who are farming today, are aged 50 to 60 and 70s. The young men don't go to farms. The policy was recently being brought to us, which the ministry wanted to fund to the tune of 2 billion shillings, called Youth for Agriculture. But it is not convincing. We told them, give us the policy paper for Parliament to adopt, so at least, because so many policies have been tried for youth and they have all failed, including the NYS programs, including the Kazi kwa Vijana. So from that experience, we told them, give us exactly really how does the youth want to be innovated and encouraged to go into agriculture. We are still waiting for that policy paper so that we can be able to look at it and adapt. But more so, for the few period that we have been there, for the last 4 years that we have been oversight in this committee, the issue of resource allocations, the issue of food security came in, and the security in terms of maybe the border policing. I have been telling Parliament, and I have been telling the nation, that at least we are really giving a lot of preference to defense, internal security, even infrastructure, education, health. Well, how do you educate a child who is hungry? What percentage of budget in this country is being consumed by the Ministry of Education? What percentage is being consumed by security arms, may it be internal or external? So when you give maybe defense 100 billion shillings, and give 20 billion, 18 billion to agriculture, it doesn't make any sense. And when I argue it in Parliament with my colleagues, they say, no, it's not your responsibility. This agriculture is devolved. What does ministry got to do with these resources? And then there we end. We stop there. So the government, the national government, have really tried for the last 4 years to subsidize production in terms of fertilizer, in terms of seeds, in terms of tractors and mechanizations. They really tried. But the issue is there's no connect between the two levels of government in terms of what is being allocated to agriculture. Once the package is given to governors or to county governments, then we don't know what they really allocate to agriculture from those counties. So there's that disconnect between the two levels of government in terms of resource allocation. So Maputo declarations of 10%. Today agriculture, including livestock, including fisheries, get 2% of the GDP, or total budget.
Let me pedal you back just a little bit, Adam. So in terms of the, how should I put it, like the working relationship between governors and national government on the question of agriculture, what kind of, it being a security issue, what kind of cooperation do you think there should be? You've certainly talked about financing of agriculture as being one of the issues. What else?
You know, these two levels, according to the constitutions, they are totally dependent, independent. That is, the counties, whatever they do with their allocations, I think it is up to their county assemblies to check what they do with it. But totally there is no connect between the two. Apart from the intergovernmental agency, which is being chaired by the DP, that they once in a while meet and maybe check what is the other doing. But so far we have never had any connect with the county assemblies or with the governors. You can never go even summon the governors and tell him what is happening in your county.
Yeah, and how smart is that, I guess, is my point. I mean, food concerns us all. It concerns national government. So certainly they should have some sort of better collaboration. And if that is the case, then what do you think it should be?
It should have been that there should have been some connection kind of in terms of resource allocations between the two levels of government. And the right hand must have known what the left hand does, because the national government comes in only at this time of crisis to mitigate those crises, because they have a duty bound to feed this nation. But in a real sense, in the past there was no real connections, because the county seems to be on their own and the national government seems to be on their own. We try to maybe reduce the gap between the two so that they can be able to talk. But of late the present minister, I think, has created that institutionalized kind of connections where they can discuss and see what is required of what county and what requires of what regions. Right. But in essence, the government has responsibility also. The national government has brought a very good policy in terms of irrigations, because the rain-fed, because of the climatical change, and because of the high potential areas which used to feed this country at independence when the populations were 7 million, are the same land. The land is not expanding. Yes. Apart from subdividing, the land is remaining the same. Yes. The soil is getting exhausted, the same fertilizers are being applied, and the productivities keep on diminishing. And the farmers are still sticking to the same policy, that at least, yes, it is them who requires to be assisted, not expanding to the arid and semi-arid issues. The money that should have been used for irrigation should be given to us so that we can be able to produce. So there's a lot of politicking in a real sense, because the little even the government has availed for subsidy or in terms of food productions of maize has now been expanded to even cash crops like sugar, like tea, like coffee, just because every region say, why should we subsidize only maize? Right. And we're also farmers.
Right.
So really there's a lot of politicking in the whole issue, whereas even in terms of even shortage, the government cannot even be able to allow to export or to import. You hear the maize imported, there will be a public outcry. You hear the sugar is being imported, there's a public outcry. The production is getting less and less. So there's really an issue to be addressed in terms of food security in this country, because people are really politicizing food security, mostly at this time of politicking.
Yeah.
That is where the issue is, and then that element of regionalism, that my region is not getting this, why should so and so get it, and then that is where the situation we are in today.
All right, hold that thought. I want to bring in Joy Mudivo, who's a governance expert. And Joy, really, you weren't sitting in for this, but I know you'll give it to us straight. The question of food security, a food revolution, cannot be divorced from the question of land and our policies towards land. And this has been certainly one of the murkiest political areas that no brave government wants to venture into, to the extent that these smaller farms are not as productive as large ones, and government being really, at the end of the day, the face that we look to ensure that we are fed. One, must government become the largest producer of food in this country? And how do you address that without dealing with the land question?
It's impossible to not talk about the land question, because you use land to produce agriculture, to produce food in a country. When you're talking about food security, it is one of those things that helps the population to be able to even develop in other areas, because if your people are well fed, then they're able to be productive in any other sphere that you need them to be available. Having food security, again, is a political question as much as it is a social question. We're having a discussion around the table about having a land consolidation policy. And Mheshimiwa here asked me, okay, whose land will you consolidate? Because government owns only so much land. A lot of that land has been given out to squatters. Now it is in individual hands. Who's going to give up their plot of land for it to be used for food production? When you look at a piece of land, if somebody gives you a piece of land, you will take a quarter of it and set up a homestead, which now means that quarter is unavailable for production anymore. And when you move forward, you'll find with the kind of socialization we have, every small piece that we get, we keep subdividing, passing along, subdividing, passing along, to an extent where areas that are possibly arable are actually being used for living rather than for production. Look at what is happening in Nairobi now. We are trying to expand outward. You go to Kiambu, plenty of wonderful red, rich loam soil being excavated for apartments. And this is something that, as a government looking at it holistically, there are some of these land areas where we should say, this is productive land, this is land that we should preserve rather than just dig up and throw away. Mheshimiwa has also talked about arid and semi-arid areas, and Dr. Kinuthia talked about also the Pokot issue and the Yatta issue. Simple interventions. Having a silanga in every homestead, that means there is water for agriculture. That is something that can be made not just at a policy level, but even as a political promise. So when we come to a place where the politics in this country is so high stakes that when you talk about land, nobody wants to touch it. It's a hot button issue. People keep passing it like a hot potato. But at the end of the day, you get to a place where it's actually going to cost the politicians moving forward, because if people do not get answers, if people do not get fed, and if they're not making money from their agriculture, then at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to vote you out, because they want somebody who will offer real solutions. So elastoplast measures will not work. We're talking just during the break, and one of the points that came out was, if we get to a place where it is always, there's an emergency, let's put stopgap measures, then there's no thought being put into how do we solve this long term. There have been suggestions about diversifying sources of food that people eat, for example, so that the land keeps being rotated and being used for different things to improve the soil texture and the soil quality. This is not a discussion that is being had anymore. So what you have is, for example, using my example, my parents in Kitale have gotten to a place now, they're no longer farming maize. They'll put passion fruits and avocado trees and have a few cows. They've gotten to a place where they only do maize for subsistence, yet they hold a large parcel, because it is no longer a worthy venture. It's too much effort, too expensive, and at the end of the day, what you're getting back in profit is not worth the effort.
Yeah, and Joy, you know, that's how I want to go back to a question that I have asked perhaps 3 times since the show began, which is, if this is really being considered as a security concern by the government, then what interventions would it take? And you've talked about land and talked about consolidating land, and I'm going to even use the dirty word of socialist kind of policies, you know. I know I'm such a potty mouth. And, you know, we saw that, you know, the USSR then bring in this sort of consolidation of land. Whether or not that was eventually successful for them or not is another issue. I believe Dr. Sam informed me, was it Tanzania across the border that tried something similar? And so to put Noor's question to you, if the government was going to responsibly deal with the land issue, if it was going to go a step further and say, look, we can't force our farmers to grow certain things, but we can become the biggest producer as government of you know, food, then how would it go about that challenge? It needs the land. You know, when you said it's security issue, the thing that came to mind immediately was Venezuela. Remember the time when they ran out of, even the supermarkets ran dry. Yes. And people took to the streets, and the government was actually brought down by a hungry population. When you do not take
this seriously. That is what it comes to. And it is true, it is a security concern. Because when your people do not feel sufficiently taken care of, they do not care that they voted for you 2 years ago. They just know that they're hungry today. And when you look at it even in terms of Nairobi politics, for example, one of the things that has propelled Honorable Sonko to where he is politically is not that he's such an astute politician, is that because he feels a gap for the common mwananchi when they are most in need. And so if the government also, like you said, wants to alleviate this, one of the strategies definitely is for them to use what is available to them to be the maximum producer, to ensure, for example, that the strategic gain is not coming from the smallholders, but is actually being produced by the farmers. That's why for me I found the failure of Galana, to me, was almost a personal loss, because I was really hoping that for once we'll get this thing right. I mean, you hear 1 million acres under irrigation, it sounds like utopia. But now look at where we are. We are at a situation whereby people cannot afford 2 meals a day. Forget about even 3 square meals. They cannot afford 2 meals a day. These same people you want to be able to work in factories all day long. You want to be able to work teaching in schools all day long, to be farming, to be hawking. You want them to generate money, to pay taxes, to run government. KRA is actually feeling a pinch because people are producing less, making less money, so they're paying less taxes. It has a snowball effect. So when you correlate food security and national security, quite frankly, that makes a lot of sense. And coming to a place where now we're importing food from outside, if, God forbid, what we import comes in and it brings a new strain of a new disease that kills a third of our population, where does that leave this country? So these are questions that we must ask ourselves. And I agree with what Dr. is saying here, that the think tanks have to be purposeful about getting a solution that is tailor-made, not just for this current crisis, but for long term. This has to be a perennial question that has to be answered.
Yeah, and I too am like a bulldog with this one, you know, looking for what a responsible government would do to become the #1 producer of food as a security issue for its people, that you can't leave it to the whim or the opportunity, yes, or chance that would come to farmers. We'll return to that shortly, but we want to switch gears, albeit briefly, to catch up with some of the politics of the day. As we told you, Raila Odinga, who is the NASA flag bearer, is having a meeting, holding a meeting rather, regarding the Nairobi race come the August elections. And our Sam again is standing by for us. He's live from Charter House, where this meeting is set to get underway very shortly. Sam, bring us up to speed.
Well, Anki Guta from the Communications Center. We are at Charter Hall, where the Orange Democratic Party, that is the ODM, is actually charting a way forward on securing Nairobi from Jubilee's onslaught, given that in 2013, ODM only managed 8 out of the possible 19 seats, and out of the 8, that is the governor being 1, and then 7 seats for members of parliament. And of course, the other seats were actually garnered or secured by the Jubilee Party, then TNA and URP. And today, essentially, what is happening here is, after the nominations, now Nairobi County, or the leadership of the Orange Party in Nairobi, wants now to put its house in order and ensure that they come up with a strategy, a winning strategy, to ensure that they secure more seats come August 8th of this year in that election. Given that in the last general election, President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, what Kenyatta got vis-a-vis what Raila got was only a difference of 32,000 votes. Then it means that this time round, everyone is trying to jostle for the control of Nairobi County. Nairobi County being, of course, the capital city and county of the country, and so the stakes are actually very high here, as both ODM, or as both the opposition and of course the Jubilee administration jostle to wrestle control of this particular county. Now joining me is the women representative for ODM in Nairobi County, the aspirant, or rather the candidate for the women representative. Yes. So we know that the stakes are high to secure Nairobi, and your seat right now is under the Jubilee administration. What makes you think that you're going to wrestle the seat from Jubilee as it is?
Well, one, I think I'm hoping for God's favor for the seat. I'm campaigning. I'm known to the electorate. When I say Mamata Mtaani, I've been there before. And I believe that NASA has got a good promise to the people of Kenya. And where Jubilee has failed, we want to go in and do the right job. You see, this is the way life works. You are employed in a job, you don't perform, the boss replaces you. And the boss here is the electorate. So we are hoping that the electorate will actually replace the current government and give NASA an opportunity to serve them.
So today's exercise, why is it so important?
Well, you know, nominations are very, very hostile. You get a lot of divisions. You get a lot of people who are frustrated. A lot of people feel that there was a favoritism. People that got the seats that shouldn't have got the seats. But we need a healing process. And I think we saw that even Jubilee had a healing process. And the idea of having a healing process is so that we don't have a fallout. And I believe that our party leader is actually seeing this as an important issue. And once we heal ourselves, then we can go to battle. You cannot go to battle when you're divided. So we need unity in NASA so that we can go to battle and win the war.
Yeah. Well, I wish you all the best as you try to unseat Rachel Shebesh. All the best. That is the ODM candidate for the Women Representative, Nairobi County. Now, joining me is now the ODM candidate for the Senate seats. Although that position is still disputed.
Well, there has been a dispute that was being, adjudicated before the Political Parties Tribunal, but the day before yesterday, the tribunal dismissed that particular petition by my brother Chapia, who's also here with us, and directed that the party's internal mechanism, find a way of picking the candidates, and we were given time for that to happen. So we are still hoping that the party will give direction on this particular matter, but I have every confidence that since the party had already expressed its position on my candidature in Nairobi, that I will still emerge with a ticket for ODM in Nairobi. Yes.
Well, they say that you contested in Bungoma, yes. Now you're being imposed on Nairobians.
Yes, I'm not being imposed, because if I was being imposed, I would be sworn in today as a senator for Nairobi. What is happening is the party is giving the people of Nairobi a choice, because we know that we have had an issue here in Nairobi in terms of the candidature for the Senate, and I believe that, at the end of the day, I ran in Bungoma because I always believe that upcountry, where we come from in Bungoma and in Western Kenya as a whole, we need to actually uplift the standards of leadership there. But now that it didn't work out, we are still going to offer ourselves here to represent the people of Nairobi. And one of the things that we've learned from this nomination process is that the voters across the country have a very big dislike for people who feel entitled, that you think that a certain position is yours. You, at the end of the day, have to come and convince voters why you feel you are the best person to represent them in the Senate, and that is what we are going to do. And at the end of the day, the people of Nairobi will determine who is best suited to represent them in the Senate.
Well, the difference in 2013 general election between Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta was really 32,000 votes only. Yes. But then again, ODM performed dismally, yes, gaining at least 8 parliamentary seats, yes, out of a possible 17. So what magic is ODM going to do this time round?
I wouldn't call it dismal performance when you get 8 out of 17 seats. And you will remember that even in that particular election, one of the biggest problems that we had as a court coalition is that we fielded aspirants on our affiliate parties in certain constituencies that allowed Jubilee to be able to Peter Katikati, as they say. And in this particular election, that issue is at the top of the minds of the leadership of NASA, and even as we speak today, there is still negotiations to see in certain constituencies where if we fielded separate candidates on the affiliate parties and give the possibility to Jubilee, Pitia and Katikati again, then those discussions are still ongoing, and I believe that a solution will be found so that in this particular election we don't see what we saw in 2013. Yes.
Well, as an aspirant who is contesting in Nairobi, yes, the entry of Mr. Paul Legathe, yes, into the race, of yes, course, backing Sonko, does yes, it pose a threat to the Kidero ticket?
I don't see the threat that Mr. Igathe's introduction poses, because first of all, the argument is that Mr. Igathe is supposed to come and cure the deficiencies of Sonko. Personally, I believe that Sonko's deficiencies cannot be cured. And number two, the kind of character that Sonko is, I doubt that Mr. Igathe would have any influence on Mr. Sonko. So I picture myself, we have seen the disputes that have been there between governors and deputy governors. I can assure you that in the unlikely event that Sonko and Igathe were to win this election, Mr. Igathe and Mr. Sonko's fallout would be immediate, because first of all, you see across the country people are looking for deputy governors who can add value in terms of numbers to their position. But one can argue solidly that Sonko's vote is Sonko's vote, so that Mr. Igathe is not bringing anything to the table in terms of bolstering up Sonko's support. So Sonko can rightfully argue, and I can guarantee you that he will tell Mr. Igathe on the first day that you brought nothing to the table and you can't tell me anything. So even those people who are arguing that he will bring some much needed experience from the private sector, he will have no say, and Sonko will always be reminding him that he knows Nairobi more than Mr. Igathe. So it has no impact as far as I'm concerned. Yes.
Well, thank you so much. I hope the dispute goes on well.
Asante.
Asante sana. Okay. Well, that is Sifuna Edwin, the Senate aspirant for ODM in Nairobi County. Of course, today's meeting is actually an aspirants meeting after the nominations, just to see how all aspirants can now join forces, work together as a single unity to face the Jubilee administration, the Jubilee Party in Nairobi County. Of course, it is a meeting that will be addressed by ODM party leader Raila Odinga, of course being hosted by the Nairobi Governor Evans Kidero. Of course, the cardinal agenda here being to make sure that Nairobi County ODM or opposition for that matter walks into the general election as a single unity after the bruising nominations battle, and of course the subsequent petitions and court cases disputing some of these results that were announced in the nominations exercise. Of course, we'll keep monitoring what transpires here. Of course, we are waiting for the arrival of the two guests, that is Raila Odinga and Evans Kidero, just to see what happens after this. Will they agree? Will they be rallied to move together as a single unity? Will Mr. Chapia back Sifuna, or the other way around? Of course, knowing that the Senate race in ODM is being contested, given that Sifuna was handed this position having contested and lost in Bungoma County. All these issues, of course, will be distilled once the guest of honors, Raila Odinga and Evans Kidero, the Nairobi County Governor, arrive here at the Charter Hall for the aspirants meeting here. So back to you at the Communication Center.
Thanks very much, Sam, for that reporting. And your report takes us into the question of Nairobi politics and how it's certainly changing. Of course, we were waiting Peter Kenneth to formally announce his bid to vie for the Nairobi gubernatorial seat as an independent, making it a colorful three-horse race, if you like, with the incumbent Sonko and Peter Kenneth. Now, and I want to introduce Damson Umari, who's joining our panel this hour. He is, of course, a political analyst, and welcome to the program. Damson, let me start with you on the question that where Edwin Sifuna left us off. He said that Polycarp Igathe is being brought to the Jubilee ticket to cure the inefficiencies or the deficiencies in Sonko, and in his words, those are deficiencies that cannot be cured. Is that your own opinion, and what is your general take on this sanitization process, if you like, of Sonko for governor?
Well, first and foremost, the job description of a deputy governor is not provided for, unlike the deputy president whose job description is clearly spelled out what he can do and what he cannot do. The deputy governor's role has only been defined in Nyeri, where upon the demise of the sitting incumbent governor, the deputy takes over. But really, is Igathe a candidate that brings on board anything? The only item known in Igathe in the public domain is one that he's a CEO, a former CEO, I don't know whether he has resigned, of Vivo, the owners of Shell oil companies, petrol stations. The next thing is only that he was seen almost being shot at by a senator, the crippled senator.
That's his claim to fame?
That is the only fame.
Come on, this is a seasoned business individual.
Yes, so the question that, is he moving to sanitize anything? Does he have any credentials in the politics of Nairobi? I think that Sonko and the group and the deputy president got it totally wrong, because the question that, if you look at the ODM, the NASA side, they have Kidero, who is coming with the Luo vote. They have brought in Sifuna to bring to bring the Luya vote. They have brought in Mweke to bring the Kamba vote. So really, He does not come with anything.
No, but Dunstan, you're probably looking at this the wrong way. That for Jubilee, at least their argument would be that Sonko is kind of like a non-tribal, non-polarizing figure. Anyone from any community in the county would by and large identify with him on a level that is not ethnic, and that would be his political strength. And so Polycarp's inclusion in the ticket perhaps is to bring in that business savvy. That was the gap Jubilee was looking to fill. It wasn't about the the ethnic calculations of who comprises the county and who will be the voter at the end of the day.
Votes in this country are voted based on tribal arithmetic. Ideally, when we teach at the university lecture halls, we talk about those theories that who comes with the business savvy, who does that. That is not the practicability.
Then he's from the right community. In that
the reality is now that Igade was supposed to deal with the Kikuyu tribal arithmetic. It has become almost now a nightmare if Peter Kenneth is true that he's going to be an independent candidate. Between Igade and Peter Kenneth, who will the Mount Kenya region be associating themselves with? I'm on this TV several and I've put it very clearly that there is a likelihood that the votes Sonko got of 133,000 votes might reduce tremendously, and he finds that he has only 50,000 votes. One, if Mweke takes over the Kamba vote, if Peter Kenneth takes away the Kikuyu vote, Sonko might remain a paper tiger on August.
Wow. Joy, let me come to you. Because, the Sonko entry into the gubernatorial race has been something that has been very exciting even before, an election was around the corner. You'll remember his power struggle with Dr. Kidero through Sonko Rescue Squad, even in the very early part of Kidero's tenure. Having said that, though, the efforts to sanitize him, to get him in a clean-cut suit, to make him appear refined, to ease the concerns of the business community, etc., maybe the concerns of the middle class. Is that in itself a problem? Does that speak to the problem of the ticket holder, or is this simply the deficiencies that any leader would have and would need a compromise and a balance when it comes to picking the ticket? And I see you smiling quite a bit.
It's because going on. It's because you said that this is a two-horse race. Then with entry of Peter Kenneth, it becomes a three-horse race. You forget that it's one Miguna.
And four-horse race. I stand duly corrected.
And he has been here before, and he dared Jeff Koinange to ask aspiring Governor Sonko what the duties of our governor are. And that's where with Sifuna I think that there are some of those deficiencies that are incurable, because if you do not know what your own job description is, then choosing an able assistant may not be able to get you there. But we see this is a growing trend. You have it with Mr. Aititu, with Ndoro. You have it with Donald Trump and Mike Pence. You find a candidate who has populace but does not have the wherewithal, getting somebody to ease the tensions of those who are not really trusting in his popularity, to have somebody on the team who can carry it forward. Now, I agree with Dunstan that when you have got a clear defined role for governor, but a not clearly defined role for deputy governor, a deputy governor can be somebody who sits in the office and does nothing. Case in point, Ms. Odinga in Kisumu, or the Machakos deputy governor. Those are two people who argued with their bosses early on, and they got to a place where their work was reading newspapers and just attending one or two functions here and there. So if you have a governor who goes in and says, look, I'm the boss here, you toe the line or you don't participate, it is very possible to have a deputy governor who has zero net effect on the running of the county. Now, the people who would be most critical are the ones he would select to be in his committee. The people who would be his cabinet, so to speak. Those are the ones who will basically be running Nairobi. So for me, the entry of Igade in this equation, I agree with Dunstan, was to try and bring a Kikuyu angle into it, but at the same time was trying to portray Governor Sonko as a person who can be trusted with Nairobi politics. In my opinion, he should have just gone with Bishop Wanjiru, because those have been two popular people who have got, they are the underdogs in this race who triumphed, and they would have been able to move forward. Is
Bishop Wanjiru popular? Do you remember what she got in the nominations?
But Bishop Wanjiru is more popular than Polycarp. Who knows Polycarp politically?
I
feel looking at consolidating the numbers. She's somebody who would move forward. And like I said, if they have a good cabinet, Nairobi would be run a little bit more professionally. In my opinion, the way the race looks like now, some of the younger intellectuals are looking like they're supporting Miguna. He's done a lot of work in the universities and elsewhere. So even his running mate is 24 years old, if I'm not wrong. And so he has this young constituency, but they're not enough to move this thing forward. So Governor Sonko stands, Senator Sonko stands a very good chance. But in my opinion, the entrance of Peter Kenneth as well as his choice of deputy governor have not helped his cause in any way.
Let's talk about Miguna for a little bit. What is it that he offers that is very different from these other three candidates? Sam, let me come to you on that.
Well, thank you, Anne. Maybe first, before I mention the issue of Miguna, I think looking at Nairobi politics from an ethnic lens is not enough, because I think one place where party politics will definitely play a role is actually Nairobi politics. The two coalitions basically are looking at marshalling their support, and you have to remember that Nairobi is one of those counties that is split 50-50. Now, there's a sense in which Sonko is seen to connect better with the masses, and especially those people in the slum areas, because it tends to address their issues or their short-term needs mostly, and he focuses on that. And if you have looked at the profile or the character of the Nairobi politician over the years, if you look at the people who you'd say that these are the former Nairobi MPs, there is something they have in common, and Sonko seems closer to that in that sense. The other thing you have to consider is that if it's a place like Westlands, Kangemi tends to determine who is their MP. If you look at a place like Dagoretti, when it was the former, when it was one constituency, again Kawangware plays a key role. If you look at Makadara, again the slum areas tend to play a role. If you look at Embakasi, the Kayole area, and there are sense in which the people who live in the slum areas tend to be the ones who determine, they come out to vote, because these people called middle class at times prefer to watch from TV and tweet and maybe discuss things from that level. But the people who actually vote and go out and vote, these are the people who are seen to identify more with Sonko. And maybe that could have informed the choice, of course, that Sonko can connect to those people. But then you see, if it's a candidate for the masses, those people, then create some level of discomfort among certain people who would feel that we need somebody who can attend to our issues. And I think the entry of Polycarp Igade was meant to bring on board that particular aspect, give confidence to certain people. Maybe they support Jubilee, but they feel that Sonko does not adequately represent how we look at issues, and hence the entry of Polycarp Igade. Now, looking at,
and to that extent, is it successful? Was it the right choice?
In terms of whether it's the right choice, I think the voters will decide. Of course, there's also the sense in that the Muranga politics, they have tended to dominate Nairobi for a long time. And I think bringing on board Polycarp was supposed to satisfy that particular group that was making noise, especially with the exit of Maina Kamana. They felt they were losing grip of Nairobi politics. And some of them are the key business people who control Nairobi businesses. And therefore, in that sense, Polycarp represents their interest, which is a good or bad thing, depends on how
or does he, now that Peter Kenneth is announcing, that he's running. Let's take you back to Miguna, and maybe I'll bounce that off to you, Danston. How is he different from these other talked about and pretty much almost predictable candidates?
I can still comment about that.
Okay, go ahead. It wasn't about your ability, Sam, but go ahead.
No, the issue of Peter Kenneth, of course, Peter Kenneth is a project that failed to gain traction. Of course, there was a feeling, but it must have been true that there are people who felt Peter Kenneth would be the right candidate for Nairobi. But the way the project was brought on board did not work, and people rejected the project in favor of Sonko, and therefore to redeem the issue, because Sonko had said there was no way he was going to have Peter Kenneth as a governor, and therefore Polycarp comes on board. He's younger, maybe he's more fresh, and he doesn't have the baggage that was pulling Peter Kenneth down. But let me comment about Miguna. There's a sense in which, and I think somebody has said that, I think it's Joy was saying that young people and professionals are talking about Miguna.
Right.
Partly it's because, of course, he is doing a lot of work on social media. He's speaking a lot. He's engaging with people. He has gone to the universities, and therefore, and he also seems to be saying the right thing. Maybe the Trump approach is bashing the media, he's bashing the rich, he's bashing certain policies, and therefore there are sense in which he's gaining traction. But I don't think at the end of the day it will be bigger than that. It will go beyond that. Miguna is a good candidate. He brings entertainment. He brings, he tends to say nice things that are tweetable. That
he's
people
a good candidate who brings entertainment.
Yeah, and say tweetable things. But in terms of policy, I don't think there is much that he will offer the people of Nairobi.
And yet he appears to be the one candidate with a plan on paper.
Exactly.
That this is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to address, he's talked about the dump site, he's talked about light rail and commuting, and he's talked about water.
If you remember what I said,
what has anybody else talked about?
Nairobi politics is primarily driven by the parties, and therefore the two candidates to look at is actually Sonko and Kidero. Kenneth Marende is also running. He did a good job as a speaker, but nobody is talking about him. Even the fact that he is Luya is definitely not a factor in this particular race. People are still looking at the two major political parties. So Miguna may have a decent, performance as number 3, but basically it's Kidero and Sonko is between the two.
Joy, tell us about your thoughts on Miguna and the politics of this county, and is this really the problem, that we're looking at parties, we're not looking at issues?
One of the problems that we have in Nairobi is that a very large population of the 4 million residents are actually in the category that you'd call, how do I put it, not exactly illiterate. Some of them are semi-illiterate, some of them are literate to a certain level, but they have a certain grasp of matters that is rudimentary, for lack of a better word.
At best.
And so you need somebody who can connect with them at that level. So when you look at Miguna, his ideas to an intellectual are very lofty. They make a lot of sense. He's the only candidate, as Sam has pointed out, who actually has a manifesto.
I pointed that out.
Oh yes, as you did. I'm sorry. And when you look at today's newspaper, one of the quotes that I saw is
yes, Sam, I'll take the credit. I heard you speaking under your breath.
Is saying that this is when somebody is working on his manifesto, meaning even in a seeking nomination, he did not know what he wanted to do for Nairobi. And so on that level, then you find the disconnect with Nairobi politics. Being the capital, you would imagine that this is where you'd have a high concentration of intellectuals or people who connect on that level. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Because when you look at the politics in Nairobi right now, I agree, it is party driven. So you have people who are looking at which party is this, and then the government has come out to clearly indicate that they see Nairobi as a prized, cherished possession. They really want Nairobi to be a Jubilee cap, and that has raised the stakes on Jubilee. It's not just Nairobi politics, is not just a county now. This is almost like it's a feather in the cap. It's something that somebody really wants in their
agenda. But where's the plan? And that's, I think that is what is, I'm picking from what you're saying, and that is troubling, is that you have people who have positioned candidates without positioning a plan at the same time. That we really thought about who will get the vote first, instead of saying what is our agenda for this county and what are our plans for it. But to the extent that, Joy, you've talked about the feather in the cap, Danston, we've seen now the deputy president take charge again of this particular race. And you remember from, I think even 2 years ago, him telling Kalenjin leaders that we do not have, a Kalenjin elected leader in Nairobi, and that was a problem, and that would need to change. That's not the equation right now. When you look at the Jubilee lineup, it's not about that, but certainly his interest in Nairobi going, government was a priority. What do you think his leadership, if you like, of the Nairobi campaigns will bring to the stakes and to the possibility that this could go Jubilee come August 8th?
There are two fights that are not being discussed. The Nairobi governorship position attracts two questions. One, the succession of President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Okay.
Who will he hand over the Mount Kenya block to? Is Sonko the one to inherit that block? Definitely no.
Right.
In 2007, President Mwai Kibaki had to bring Uhuru Kenyatta in preparation to hand over power to him in 2013. Who is Uhuru Kenyatta going to hand over power to? Not in terms of the president, but in terms of the leadership of the Mount Kenya region. And that is the reason why Peter Kenneth is being fronted by all means that Peter Kenneth cannot be wished away. What is this arithmetic and calculations of the deputy president? One, Governor Kabogo has put it very clearly that the Mount Kenya bloc is not there automatically to support the deputy president unless the deputy president proves by conduct and by work that he deserves that bloc. You've seen Sonko being pushed by the deputy president so hard. Where is the president? Wait.
I have a conspiracy theory, which we will discuss later, but pedal back just a little bit to the influence of the deputy president in Nairobi. What gravitas does it bring? Does it increase the likelihood that you will see, them deal with, first of all, the big fallout that there was over the Nairobi seat? Does it bring, better political experience in terms of strategy? What do you think the gain is for the Nairobi ticket now that the deputy president is taking charge, it appears?
The handlers of the deputy president got it wrong. That the deputy president has come out very clearly identifying himself with the Sonko camp to the exclusion of the president's presence. People will turn in August and start saying, is Sonko going to take our bloc? Is Igade the one who is going to be given the Mount Kenya bloc? The alternative of Peter Kenneth is a very, very dangerous blow to the Sonko campaign. And I've said it very clearly. Sonko's people turned out to be 133. Is there any candidate of Sonko's class who didn't vote? In my own view, no, everybody, during the nomination, people of the slums voted. Sonko won with over 800,000 votes in 2013. He gets 133. With more people having come of mature age, he could have scored at least 500.
You think they're reading this wrong? They're overplaying his popularity?
That is what I'm saying. If you look at Waititu, he scored 300,000. If you look at Governor Ranguma and all the other people, they are doing 200, 300, very small counties. The governors were winning with over 200,000 votes. So the most popular county in the whole country wins with 133. That is a statement that people need to interrogate further. Let me tell people, it is not the wearing of a suit that changes the mindset of a person. It takes several issues of socialization, academic orientation, mindset shaping to change the thinking of Sonko. Sonko wearing a three-piece suit does not become executive. He is only executive in dressing, in how he looks at issues. And that is what Kenyans are, what Nairobians are asking. Can this person turn to be a technocrat? Look at one Raila Odinga, a Marxist student of 1980s onward. People are still very, very not sure that one Raila Odinga can develop from a rebel to become a statesman. It took almost 20 years for Raila Odinga to shape himself to look as a statesman. And therefore, it is not, people are very jittery with the song. When he says that Uhuru Park will be turned into a Matatu Park, that is a very scaring notion for the owners of the property. Muranga controls that 60% of the gross domestic income that is generated in Nairobi. Muranga people control almost 40% of that generation of that. If they have a stake in Peter Kenneth, and I'm telling people very clearly, let us observe, in August, the Mount Kenya tribe will rally behind their successor. Sonko is not their successor.
So you're saying Peter Kenneth could be in it to win it?
Peter Kenneth is the man to watch. Actually, Sonko will fade away within a very short time. The battle of the titans will be between Peter Kenneth and Kidero.
Dan, so let me ask you this, because you have pointed out the conspicuous absence of the president in terms of these meetings, but I mean, that's also kind of arguable given the fact that even when he came, to the running of party primaries, he didn't do it. He delegated to his deputy, the deputy president. So perhaps there may still be time for him to actually start, going around and actually backing candidates and giving that highest level support that may be in the wings, and he's been clear that he will support Jubilee candidates. But are you suspecting that behind the scenes the president isn't for Sonko and maybe, more likely to have very sincerely meant that we pray for, Peter Kenneth's chances?
And what is there is that there seems to be some sympathy votes going to the direction of Peter Kenneth. Peter Kenneth was not interested in Nairobi gubernatorial position. He wanted to go to Murang'a. Who dragged him from Murang'a to bring him to Nairobi? Was Nairobi a kichinjio for Peter Kenneth? He has no party. He closed his shop. He closed his party. He joined Jubilee.
It was a setup, you're saying?
I think that is the question that Peter Kenneth is telling people, that I was set up, I've been destroyed, and now you people either protect me, and that is going to be a serious political question that the Mount Kenya people are going to be told.
Who set him up?
We don't know. We don't know.
Sam, talk to me.
The people who must have set him must have gone now to support
somebody somewhere.
And that is why Peter Kenneth, people are telling him that move on. Will he carry the sympathy votes like what Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto carried during 2013?
Are we very sympathetic people also? Sam, talk to me.
I think we're almost now peddling conspiracy theories that are unfounded.
It is purely politics. Politics is a game of conspiracy.
Yeah, at least he has admitted his conspiracy theories. But if you look at it, in 2013, the Nairobi people had a choice between Kidero and Waitito, and there was a feeling among some people who voted for Uhuru Kenyatta, but they felt Waitito did not represent, he was not a technocrat. That's what has just been mentioned right now, and they felt that Kidero would be the right person. Right now, because of Nairobi politics, but we have seen what has happened in terms of garbage, cleanliness in Nairobi, street children, the inefficiency and the mismanagement that we have seen in Nairobi County, and people have been complaining about the last 5 years. And the question is, do we really need a technocrat to run Nairobi? And that is why, in a sense, those who are pushing for Sonko think that maybe we could even have tried Waitito. At least you'd have spoken about the things that matter to the people in terms of congestion, in terms of, the market for the people, in terms of garbage collection, simple basic services. Now, Kidero talks about a master plan, because you asked who has a plan for Nairobi. There is a master plan that exists, and Kidero has been talking about it. Now, it will require a number of years to implement this master plan, and that is why even the national government is involved, because we're talking about manifesto. These issues are there. The problems of Nairobi cannot be solved within a 5-year period. But what I am looking at here, the candidature of Sonko, and not necessarily propping him for this, but there's a sense in which he's the alternative or the opposite of Kidero, but people felt that he needed a little bit more support from a technocrat, in this case now Igade. And the jury is still out in terms of how the people of Nairobi will vote. Now, the issue of Peter Kenneth, definitely we know somebody brought him into the Nairobi race, because he came into the race a bit late. Even the issue, even if he was to go to Murang'a, again it was still late, the race was already defined. So there's a sense in which maybe he is unhappy, maybe he is bitter. Some people may have promised him something, because we understand there was a lot of pressure on Sonko to step down for Peter Kenneth, and he came out and said he will not step down. So in a sense, the entry of Peter Kenneth into the Nairobi politics, I do not think that he's going to carry the Mount Kenya vote necessarily. I say Nairobi will primarily be driven by the party politics. He comes into the race as a spoiler, or maybe he is angling for something. Maybe he's positioning himself so that some people, he mentioned yesterday that we'll have the press conference today. Maybe there are negotiations going on behind the scenes. People are telling him, please don't, and maybe this is what he wanted. He's negotiating for something. There was a conversation that he was being offered a ministry like the former metropolitan ministry that brings Nairobi, Kiambu, Murang'a, I think Machakos and Kajiado County. He was offered that. Maybe that is what he is positioning himself for by calling this press conference, because he knows he does not stand a chance of dethroning Kidero. The entry of Kenneth complicates matters for Jubilee, and I can assure you right now, calls are going around, interventions are being made, and maybe most likely
tires are being diffused and all.
It's politics. That is how you negotiate. That's how you negotiate in politics.
And fake traffic jams being created. Joy, what is your perspective?
When I look at this, one of the things that scares me with this conversation is when you look at the candidates that we have right now. If, for example, we had a Peter Kenneth, Mike Sonko ticket, it would have been such a refreshing change, because these are two astute politicians coming together and who might actually have something to say for Nairobi. But the failure, like we talked about earlier, of Jubilee to maintain their in-house politics played out in the public domain, and now it's costing them big time. In my opinion, I share the sentiment that Sam has. Peter Kenneth could be announcing his candidature as a spoiler. He knows he cannot unseat Kidero, and he knows he possibly will not get more votes than Sonko. But just to take away his 62,000 and keep his 62,000 to himself, rather than benefiting the Jubilee ticket, might actually be what he's angling for. In my opinion, again, conspiracy theories, this might be what somebody wants. Might say, by the way, rather than having a Sonko governorship, let us just go back to Kidero we know. And in the 5 years, with no portfolio, Senator Sonko might be able to fade into political oblivion, and Peter Kenneth might still be able to be propped up for 2022, either as governor or as successor for something else. So that is where I'm seeing this angle going. Because when you think even about, in terms of policies, what we have seen coming out of Senator Sonko so far is scrapping the cess fees for mamambogas and scrapping the trading licenses for small-scale traders. I mean, how else is county government going to function if they don't raise taxes from the traders in the city? But you can tell it's not been thought out. It's still the same populace, the same. In my opinion, we are facing the same crisis that the Americans are dealing with right now, where you've got somebody who's done very well elsewhere, but has finally been elevated to the level of incompetence. Because this is a place where it is going to be a fish out of water. My worry is that if this continues playing out, then we might have a situation whereby not only is it Kidero coming back, but the base for having government in control of Nairobi is completely weakened. And right now, if you're looking at somebody, for example, like Miguna Biguna or Marende now, for example, alternative voices that could have been beneficial in building a stronger Nairobi, who are going to be totally, because in my opinion, if somebody had found a way of getting Miguna into their team, yes, it would have been excellent, because the man thinks, the man can articulate, and he's beholden to nobody. He's not anybody's puppet. So you can be sure this is somebody who would have been able to bring a lot of direction. But Nairobi politics, unfortunately, is worth a lot, but is peddled on very rudimentary basis. Sometimes it defies logic.
Yeah, logic has
and I can throw in a conspiracy theory also. I can throw in one conspiracy theory.
Come on, do it. This is the show where you get to do that.
I don't think President Uhuru Kenyatta minds Kidero as the governor of Nairobi. Based on how they have been interacting, how they have been relating over the couple of years, there's chemistry between them. I don't think he minds him as the governor of Nairobi. I don't think it's such a disaster for the president. I won't talk about Jubilee.
Okay. No, hold it there. We want to just switch gears very briefly and catch up with some of the stories that we've been following. And the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, is holding a meeting with various stakeholders in the education sector about the smooth running of these institutions as we head into an electoral period. Let's listen in to what he's saying.
Take a 2-week break from 4th of August to facilitate the process of elections, as it were. So the rest of the other issues, we will discuss them, and my colleagues from the basic education sector, the PS has already done the circular, which will go out through the RCs, and if there's anything you need us to know, we'll go ahead. Some of our institutions are polling stations. Again, what's different this year, and I've spoken to the chair of IBC on this issue, we will hand over our institutions formally. It will not be a case where we walk out and then the IBC says we are coming here to Lone Tree Primary School to conduct elections. No, we must know from IBC how many classrooms they will need, which classrooms those are, and what facilities they will need. For those of you whose colleges or universities will be used, same story. You need to have an inventory of what facilities the IBC will need, hand them over, and then receive them back from the IBC as soon as the process is done, so that we are able to help each other, be responsible. I have already written to the chair of IBC about our school in Migori, which I expect would be repaired by the political party that was involved. Our school somewhere, I think in Laikipia or Nanyuki, which I hope will be repaired by the party that is involved. And it's upon the IBC to ensure that public property that's damaged is repaired, because we do not build schools so that they are destroyed, the process. And as responsible citizens, these schools do not belong to us. We should be responsible adults. We are borrowing these facilities from our children. It is very shameful to borrow things from our children and destroy them in the process. Our children need them. So let's talk to each other as responsible adults. We are borrowing these facilities from our children. Let us return them to our children in the condition that they can use them when we are done using them. It's like you borrow something from your son or a pen from your son and you throw it away. It's not sensible to behave that way. So I think these are the issues that we'll deal with as we go along, and many others that we're going to address. I wish you all the best, but before you leave and we all leave to our respective discussion rooms, I want you to know that we at Jogo House are very grateful to you. However hard we work, my brothers and sisters, we can't run the education sector of our country on our own. You vice chancellors who work so hard with your colleagues, the chancellors and the others in universities, we are very grateful for the work that you do. My colleagues, the principals who are here, we are eternally grateful for your commitment and the level of responsibility that you have shown. We've gained a lot from conversations with you. I want to ask you, Mr. Ndimuli, and your colleagues, that let us have a completely stable, peaceful sector as we move to the elections for the sake of our children and for the sake of our country. My joy, and I believe all of you people will be happy that we go through this experience with all our children safe and secure. Even those of us who are going to engage in co-curricular activities, I know we have some athletics this term and some music festival in July. We have given you firm guidelines on how you transport our children and how they are going to sleep. My colleagues, the officers in the field, I promise you, you will take responsibility if anything goes wrong. We can make mistakes on anything, and that we can live with. But we can't live with a mistake or recklessness that is going to affect our children. We have to be responsible people. So every one of us has got to be on duty, especially the supervisors, to be sure that this is sorted out and we keep our children safe. I can't emphasize this issue. The safety and security of our children is paramount, and we have to make sure that we go through this period and make sure that our children remain safe. So with that, I want to request that we now move to our respective state departments. PS Muinzi will move with Kathy and the principals from colleges. PS Dr. Kipsang will move with Mr. Ndimuli and the team from the basic education sector. We will remain here briefly with Professor Sudam and the colleagues from the university sector so that we can have our own discussion here. Thank you very, very much, and God bless you.
That being the Education Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, addressing various administrators of schools, technical colleges, universities, talking about the safety of those attending as we get closer to the elections. So we'll keep following that report for you and bring you comprehensive coverage of it in our subsequent bulletins. We want to keep talking this morning and move on to the question of the IALA nominees, which certainly has become such a political issue. Joining us this hour is Ezra Mbogori, who is a governance analyst. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us. We saw in Parliament yesterday basically no-go from both sides, Jubilee and the opposition disagreeing on how to handle this issue, disagreeing on names, etc. Why is this IALA list so political, and is this how it's always been?
I think that the importance of IALA has been downplayed in the past. I think IALA is a forum, an important forum for East Africa, and for undergirding the notion of regional integration. Why there's arguments? I think that there's probably a misplacement of the role that IALA members of the Legislative Assembly play, and those that are interested in what happens, I think, are looking more at what the personal benefit of the nominees might be. I think it's that sort of confusion that is clouding things right now.
And tell us more about IALA's importance. We heard, at least from opposition legislators yesterday, talking about the importance of continuity in terms of the legislators who sit there because of safeguarding Kenya's interests in as far as regional cooperation is concerned. Give us specifics of that, what that would be.
Well, as you know, the East African community has itself had its ups and downs. You know that the very first community was itself an experiment that failed to a certain extent because of disagreements, I think, at the top level. But I think that what was important is to recognize the potential. The potential from a business perspective, for instance, if you look at the fact that it creates a market of 100 million by just having an integrated East Africa. But also the additional clout that comes from an integrated East Africa. When you come to negotiations, like trade negotiations, you know the controversies that are at play right now around the signing of the economic partnership agreement with the EU. But it's that power that is represented by a united East Africa. And I think part of the problem here, the notion of continuity is really important given the history of the East African community, and the fact that what we need to do is be consolidating rather than, say, restarting the process of creating the clout that exists, or creating the understanding that will then propel the East African community forward. I think it's those kinds of problems that we need to be addressing a lot more consciously, and if you at least keep those members of the Legislative Assembly that were there, you have a much greater chance of driving the interests and concerns of this country in the community going forward. And so in your perspective, given that largely the rejection of this list is centered around, oh, opposition is nominating too many people, oh, there's the claims of nepotism, etc., are we missing the point in terms of picking those who should be sitting in this regional assembly? Well, IALA is one of the places where competence also has to be taken into account. And I think that one of the mistakes that could easily be made is that of electing or nominating people who have no history and not necessarily understand the dynamics, the issues at play. While we have some really, really competent people that could carry on and could move the East African community forward, but also move the interests of this country forward. That's what we need to be worrying about. All right, and therefore the qualifications of Kalonzo Musyoka's would come to bear on that. I think they should be scrutinized, like any other member that might be being nominated. I think they should be scrutinized. Okay. Dunstan, your thoughts on the debate on IALA?
Well, when you look at the debate surrounding the IALA members who are going there, I tend to believe that what we have just been talking about, Sonko issue, nobody bothers about the competence of the people who represent the Kenyans. Nobody cares about the interest of the nation. When you look at both divides, the people, the names that they are presented as the representatives to represent their coalitions or their parties, they are people who have been nominated based on nepotism, the dynastic issues, either relationships or patronage, and therefore, will these people, when they go to the IALA assembly, represent me and you, Wanjiku, watching today? I doubt. And this is the question that Kenyans need to discuss. Do we ever place the people who are qualified to the task on any appointment that we do, on any elective position that we do? Our yardstick of appointment and nominating somebody or electing somebody is totally not in tandem with what is supposed to be done. When we look at what is happening within the East African region, Kenya slowly is being isolated. Tanzania and Uganda have gone as if they are trading together. Everybody knows that Kenya is a serious trading partner between Uganda and Tanzania. But what is happening? We've seen that slowly we are shifting from trading with our neighbors, which was the core of East African community. We are now going to China to trade. What is likely to happen? Once we send mediocre people to the IALA assembly, then we will have totally destroyed the bigger market that we need to develop. Where are we going to take the SGR railway? What produce is it going to carry if Tanzania and Uganda have gone the other side? That is an indictment that people who were in Yala the other time were busy looking at the interests of the parties that sent them there. Do those members, when they go there, represent the interest of Kenyan? I doubt. They represent the interests of the parties and the owners of the parties that send them there. It is true that we are not sending any foreigner to that place. But ask yourself, when we are sending a son of a deputy prime president, God willing, if Kalonzo wins, if NASA wins, is that the best representation that Kenyans will be looking at to represent our interests? That is not the best representation that we look. And this is across board. Neither Jubilee nor NASA is looking at the interest of the Kenyan. And the reason why...
but what in law would make... would stop, Wiper from doing that? The gentleman is qualified, he's a lawyer, perhaps you'd argue experience, but I mean, legally speaking, this is what our laws provide for. Legally, anybody who is above, who has the age and qualification, qualifies. Yeah. But the question that Kenyans need to ask further, is that the person who represents the interests of Kenyans, can he negotiate for the interest of Kenyans? Are we moving away from chapter 6 to deal with the question of the face of the republic? So that if we take Raila Odinga and he nominates his daughter, his sister, his mother to the Yala, and Uhuru Kenyatta does that, will there then, legally they are right, but the challenge that we have, one person called Omtata has gone to court to challenge, because there must be a criteria to have the interests of the state, of the country represented. We cannot go blindly and say that so long as everybody is a Kenyan, so long as everybody is a mature person, we can nominate anybody. And there must be a standard of morality, there must be a standard of sovereignty. Article 2(1) of the Constitution talks that the sovereignty of the people rests, of Kenya rests with the people, and that can be exercised through their elected representative or through direct representative. Does that lawyer represent really a constituency that we say? If this is the dilemma that is there, we included the last tribe. This tribe called, the one that the president allowed to be, this guy from the coast. I don't know their name. The last tribe, 43. Will anybody from that community, the Makonde community, ever land a position at the Yala? If that position... But similarly, even with that argument, the question then should go beyond just, spread. It should be about qualification. It's not just about, making sure that you have one of each there. If it's really about the interests of this of the state and what's best for the state, then again it will have to land at the doorstep of qualifications. The qualifications are legal. The reality, that's what I'm saying, if we go literally reading the qualification, when as lawyers we interpret the law, there is the literal interpretation and the purposeful interpretation. What was the spirit of Kenyans when they were making the constitution? Were they making a constitution to be read in a narrow mind that anybody who has the qualification can represent Kenyans to that? No. Right. That is my position, that we need to interpret the law from a way that Wanjiku expected the law to be represented. By conduct and implication, the members who are nominated there should be acceptable across the board. You've seen the hue and cry all over. People are asking, are we rewarding cronies? Well, that is the question. Isn't that what party lists are about? And I'm not saying that is right, but that's how it is. That is the reality. That's the reality. Ezra, I want to wind up with you finally, because of what Damston has brought in terms of the regional dynamics, Kenya's positioning, and the ability to have somebody who can defend the state's interests. And we while government goes out there and says all is well, with our primary trading partners, with with our neighbors and all of that, so you begin to get a feeling that that isn't the reality on the ground. What is your own interpretation of Kenya's relations with its neighbors?
Well, the impression one gets is that it's not all is not well. That in fact the neighbors, as has been suggested, are drifting away, are getting on with their own story, and are basically working very well. Thank you very much. We do have a community though, and I think that putting the right people in places like the East African Community will enable Kenya to find its position again. But beyond that, I think there's also the question of what Wanjiko should do. And one of the reasons that I felt it important to mention the notion of Wanjiko as well is because there are younger Kenyans who are beginning to feel that it is time that, or not just Kenyans actually, Africans, that are beginning to feel that it is time Africans position themselves to demand much more, not just from their leadership, but from the potential that exists for Africa's development. And you might have heard of a movement called Africans Rising, and this is basically a play on the notion of, you know, saying that we're not looking at Africa rising as defined by the economists, for instance, or by economic indicators, but more Africans beginning to take charge and to say it's time we exploited the potential that exists in our country. When you talk about the notion of Wanjiko's sovereignty, for instance, how else are we going to attain it than by demanding accountability? So Africans Rising for Justice, Peace and Dignity is a movement that hopes to spur and to initiate the process of people coming together in a movement that will itself insist on equity and on addressing the issues that face Africans on every part of this continent. And this is a question of Wanjiko beginning to demand much more, and much more consciously, and to tell leaders that they can no longer expect a free pass when they get into leadership.
All right, and I thank you both for your views, and I thank you all for staying with us throughout these 3 hours. We're just winding down the news part of it. Of course, trends are coming up very shortly, but before we get there, Jackie Maribe is live for us. She's in Mombasa, where there is a retreat between, I believe, members of parliament and journalists. And Jackie, tell us more about what's going on at this retreat.
Right, Kiguta, because the 11th Parliament is essentially winding up, Parliament felt it was important to have this meeting between the Kenya Parliamentary Journalists Association, in essence the journalists that cover Parliament for you day to day, and the leadership of Parliament. But it's also a session that is an enabling environment for journalists to ask those crucial questions to these particular members of Parliament and the leadership, as it were, of the National Assembly. And some of the things that we have been able to hear, Kiguta, so far this morning, as the 11th Parliament is heading out and the 12th Parliament is coming in, remember, every time you know, a new House of Parliament comes in to the House, there are all these perks that they are able to be given. The question is, what happens to them, Kiguta, when they are exiting? And one of the questions that has been posed this morning is the issue of mortgage loans and car grants. Now, as you know, there have been primaries and a number of big names have fallen, as it were, and therefore the question is, will they then be returning these perks and privileges that they have been enjoying as they were in the 11th Parliament? We've heard from the new clerk of the National Assembly, Michael Selai, who is affirming that they are taking measures to ensure that as members of Parliament exit and everyone goes back to the polls in August, those who will not make it back and those who do make it back will have to essentially find a system where they will have to repay Parliament every single loan that they have taken. You know, Kiguta, these mortgage loans go up to excesses of 3 million shillings that they are entitled to, even, you know, as far as we're speaking, their car grants. And we are being told that they will have to repay those loans before they exit and the 12th Parliament can officially actually begin. But Kiguta, there is also the question that has been on everybody's mind. We have seen so many independent candidates running up to 5,000. This is over 7,000 times the number that we saw back in 2013. And the question to parliamentarians here this morning is there a possible risk that it could shake what we know as tyranny of numbers in the House? Parliament currently, its leadership and its officers are saying that as the standing orders that normally guide the House would in essence therefore have to be changed if we see an increased number of independents, because the 11th Parliament currently only has 4 independents that are sitting members of Parliament, and therefore they would have to adjust or relook at the standing orders, as it were, to ensure that there is basically not a very hard shift between the majority party and the minority party, because these are the only ones that are recognized. What happens then, Kiguta, in the event that these independent candidates that, you know, are running and say they make it to the 11th Parliament and hold crucial positions, how then would that affect the running of Parliament, the committees of Parliament? And these are things that now the 11th Parliament and its leadership, as they plan to exit, are currently tasked with looking at and how to find structures of how exactly independent candidates will be accommodated in the House, in crucial committees, and as well not to quote-unquote rock the boat when it comes to majority party versus minority party. The session continues. It's a whole weekend affair. As soon as we have more, Kiguta, we will let you know.
Much Jackie Maribe reporting for us this morning, and that's where I wind up the news segment on Citizen Extra this morning. We want to thank you so much for your company, but stay tuned. George Chalanga joins us now. Of course, she's got a panel. They're going to be